Hello lovely people. In the previous video, if you saw, I did kind of a review of this Alpine RS shallow mount subwoofer. It's a 10-inch, very cool, with 20mm of X-Max. And in this video, we're gonna real world test it. So in order to test it, because test is something temporary, something easy and fast, I will be making a temporary enclosure from some very thin MDF. I am planning to put it in the footwell and it will be acting as my front subwoofer. Now, if you don't know what the front subwoofer is for, I highly recommend search on my channel front subwoofer and you will find a few different videos explaining why do we need this. This subwoofer calls for a half a cubic foot minimum, which is like, I think it's like 12 liters or something. However, for now, I'm just gonna make a very simple box just to put it on top, and it's probably gonna be much lower in volume. Maybe like, I have no idea how much it's gonna be, 8-7 liters, but we'll see how it's gonna be, because what I want to see the frequency response, how it is, and how the footwell is loading. So for this, I just made a few templates from paper. Is gonna be one board is gonna be like this. The box itself is gonna be slanted. I'm not gonna make it square because I'm gonna put it square. I won't be able to fit it right there, so it will have to be slanted like this. And imagine another one, and it's gonna be like this. So I will be using this wood, which is just scrap wood that I have and I found. This is I think it's like probably 12mm MDF, and it will go something like this. Then I will have a bottom plate like this, and then this subwoofer itself is gonna go and be something like this. Mounting depth is gonna have much more than it needs, and I think it's gonna be very cool to test it. And later on, if I'm gonna like this, if I'm gonna like the response and how it performs and everything, then we're gonna build a proper enclosure, and basically from this we're gonna see if we need a bit more volume or this volume is gonna be perfectly fine. So let me cut some wood, let's make the temporary box, and let's install this subwoofer. This is a week into the future. Now it's, typical UK weather. Either it's super cold, either it's raining like that. So today it is warm, but it's very rainy. I did the enclosure, as I mentioned, very simple. MDF, no bracing, no nothing. And to be honest, this 12mm MDF, it made the box quite sturdy. So I think it's gonna be fine for testing. I did check it, it's not leaking, there's no air leaks, no nothing. I did seal it from the inside. The best thing about this, and this is gonna be a teaser for a future, I can fit in this enclosure the Dayton sub as well. If I have another 12mm baffle here on the top as a spacer, then the magnet is gonna fit, and I will have a little gap for the motor to cool. So I will be able to test this Alpine, the Dayton that I had. At the same time, I will put the One Audio 8-inch mid bass in a sealed enclosure and the Helix C5. Now, the Helix drivers, they shouldn't be using sealed enclosures, especially small, because they are designed for infinite baffle. However, for testing purposes, just for testing purposes, I will put them in and we will see how all of those drivers behave differently. And this is how it looks like when the box is in the place. So it does go, let me show you, in there. Everything is very tight. And it is a typical location just like that if you would installing it. So if it would be a proper box, probably it would be deeper inside and the sub could be a bit more flatter, whereas now it's a bit facing. So, but for testing it's not going to be perfect. Now I will be testing it like this, and then somebody suggested as well, I will try to flip it the other way around so it would be firing into the firewall. I will make sure to put some spacers there just to have some breathing space and to see if we're going to have a little bit better loading from that corner, and maybe we will have some better results. Now I'm sitting in the passenger side just for you to show how much space you have. It's not very convenient, but it's possible to sit, because if I'm going to be testing it temporary, the passenger that's going to be driving with me, he will have to be like this, but so you can pull the seat backwards. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that this box, this enclosure, is not going to be screwed or mounted into anything. It's just literally, it just sits in there. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take the measurements, because my theory is that this subwoofer itself, it has a lot of moving mass. So when it's going to be pushing air in and out, that moving mass, high moving mass, might vibrate the actual sub box itself, because relatively speaking, the enclosure is very light and the cone is very heavy. So according to Mr. Isaac Newton, we will have some forces acting on it. So I will do two types of sweeps. One, I'm gonna do it like this when the sub box is just sitting there, and second time I'm gonna push it with my feet and make sure that it's seated properly and it's not moving at all, because I want to see if there's a difference when you mount the subwoofer with bolts into the frame or when you just leave it just like that, just sitting there. I hope there is a difference, and I hope we're gonna see that. Man, it's so rainy, such a horrible weather. At the same time, I did measure it there. I want to measure it here as well, so it's gonna be exactly the same location as I had this one, and a HDZ. It's just right there in the corner, and we will see how it performs compared to the Explode and to the HDZ as well. And I think I forgot to mention, this box is 10 liters, so which is like 0.35 cubic feet or something like that. So I'm gonna go and measure it because it's raining. I have just finished tuning the car and I had to listen to it, and I'm overexcited now, but I'm gonna try to keep all the excitement for the end of the video, where I'm gonna try to explain and to describe what I'm hearing. We're gonna start with modeling because I think this is fun exercise, and I think it might be useful for a lot of people, especially for those that are gonna be choosing a front subwoofer based only on paper specs. So this is modeling of a few different subwoofers. This is the Alpine, is the one that I'm testing now, the shallow mount. This is the transfer function magnitude. This is not SPL, it's slightly different. I put all of these subwoofers in 0.6 cubic feet boxes. I'm gonna remove all of them just to leave the Alpine. Currently, the Alpine sits in, okay, we have 17 liters. Currently, it sits in 10 liters. So it is a much smaller box that I'm modeling, but I'm planning to make it bigger. So now I'm testing at 10, and you can see it's peaking at 60 hertz. And if I'm gonna make the box bigger, 17 liters, it's gonna be peaking at 52, 53. So basically about 10 hertz lower. Now, currently, it's gonna play 10 hertz higher compared to these. And it's kind of the same for all the other subwoofers. And basically from this modeling, we can see that this is a very high Q driver, especially when you put it in a small sealed enclosure. You can see here, QTC is 1.8, which is not that good of a thing, because with high QTC, you have what people say overshoots, ringing, and overdamped, and that kind of stuff. But we're gonna see how the sub performs from the actual measurements. Now, I did add a few different subwoofers to compare, but before we compare, we need to check something else. When you're designing an enclosure, there's gonna be like a little tip as well. First of all, I am limited by space. So as I mentioned, 17 liters, which is 0.6 cubic feet for all the enclosures. Then we go to signal and we're going to add the RMS power. So for this subwoofer is going to be 600 watts. For all the other subwoofers that I added just a few. I didn't add all of them. So I added the Dayton RSX265, the one that I have currently. I added a Hertz shallow mount, JL10TW3, which is the most popular shallow mount. The SB Acoustics, the people that use in the UK especially, very, very popular driver. Stereo Integrity MB11. Again, this is 11-inch driver, so slightly bigger than 10. And I do have a few Faithful Pros because I want you to check them out, because when we did the previous video and I did some modeling, apparently if we go to group delay, this is the group delay for these drivers. So you can see the Alpine has the highest group delay, which is at about 12.5 milliseconds. All the other drivers are staying about 6-7 milliseconds. And I tried to add some Faithful Pros, which are extremely light cone, and you can see all the Faithful Pros are here. So it's about 3.5 milliseconds. They have the least group delay. Now, I did ask ChatGPT to summarize the group delay for me, and he said that anything that is 10 milliseconds and lower is barely going to be, probably not going to be noticeable. Above 10 milliseconds, up to 20 milliseconds, it will be noticeable, and above 20 milliseconds, it's going to be very noticeable. And this is exactly what we saw with the Alpine and with the Explode when they had, I think, 25, close to 30 milliseconds all the way up there. And that was noticeable. Now, this Alpine is the only one that kind of sticks out with the highest group delay. And this group delay depends on the specific parameters of the driver and size of the enclosure. If I'm going to add, for example, 1 cubic foot, see this shifted to 40 hertz instead of 50. So it depends on many factors, but this group delay is higher than all the other options. And it's going to be very interesting to compare it with the Dayton, because I do have the Dayton one, and you can see that the Dayton has like half of the group delay. So in the next video, I'm going to put the Dayton in the box, and we're going to see if we can correlate this group delay in the modeling with the impulse response that we're going to measure with REW. Going back to the modeling itself, when you add enclosure size, when we add the RMS rating of the driver, first thing we need to do is to check cone excursion to make sure that the driver in that specific enclosure size with that specific power doesn't go above its Xmax. Like 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter above Xmax is fine, but we don't want to have a driver that's going out of control. So all of these drivers, like this one, hertz, it's going above Xmax below like 27 hertz, but it's not much, it's fine. So even on full power, it's not going to bottom out because the mechanical X mech is much bigger than this. For example, the JL, it stays below Xmax. Xmax is 15. It stays 12 millimeters. This Alpine that we have, it has 20 millimeters of Xmax, and with rated power, it does 16 millimeters max. That means that this subwoofer in this enclosure is limited by how much power it can handle. If I'm gonna push, let's say 1,000 watts into it, it's gonna reach Xmax, but just reach it. It's not gonna go over it too much, but the coil most likely is gonna burn. So in this case, we're limited thermally and not mechanically. If I would increase this box size to, for example, 1 cubic foot, then we're reaching very close. If it's going to be 1.2, we have Xmax, and 1.5 is going slightly over Xmax. So for this subwoofer, the Alpine, you really need a much bigger enclosure. For example, 1.2 cubic feet sealed. Only then you can use it to its full potential. Anything lower than that, you're not using it fully. And this is going to be, in my case as well, I'm not going to be utilizing this subwoofer to its full potential. However, I think it's still going to be good. So when we check this, that none of these drivers are going over Xmax, we can go to the SPL tab. And SPL tab shows us modeled SPL on RMS power on certain frequency. So for example, this, in this small box, 0.6 cubic feet at RMS power, it can do 111 dB. That's the model. If we're gonna have any cabin gain, for example, the footwell or in the back in the boot, that's probably gonna add another 6 or even 10 dB, depending on the frequency and depending on the location, how much we're gonna have that cabin gain. So it's gonna be loud. Now, if I'm gonna compare this to the Dayton is doing this. Now, when we're modeling an enclosure, we need to kind of pay attention to which region in frequency is the most important for us. If I'm going to go to REW, these are my targets from the Insignia, but I think it's going to be something very similar, not exactly the same, but very similar in this car. The blue one is the infinite baffle subwoofer, crossed at 45 hertz. Then we have the green one, which is the mid bass, crossed at 85 hertz acoustically. And the orange one, is my front subwoofer, crossed 45 to 85. If I'm going to remove this and this is basically what I need my front subwoofer to play ideally. So it means that frequencies between 50 and 60, which is this peak, is the most important for me, and I need to have the most energy in this area. I can deal with the slopes using EQ and crossovers, but I need as much energy, like even between 45 and 70. But it's somewhere centered about 55-60 hertz. So if we have a look at this modeling, this Alpine in this 0.6 cubic feet is peaking at 55 hertz. And this is literally spot on exactly what I need. Now, the Dayton one, as I mentioned, the one that I have, it has a kind of nicer frequency response, but at this frequency, that I need to be the loudest, the Alpine is 3.2 dB louder compared to the Dayton. At lower frequencies, if we take 40, it's still close to 3 dB louder, and at 60 hertz is just 1 dB louder. But in this critical area, the Alpine will be a tiny bit louder than the Dayton. However, the difference is that the Alpine is going to be only like 70% of its X-Max, not reaching it, whereas the Dayton one is going to be at or over its X-Max. Obviously, it's very insensitive, that's why it will need twice as much power, but it's kind of the same because the Dayton is rated to what, 350 watts? So if you double the power to 600, we have kind of the same, but obviously the Dayton is not going to handle 600 because the coil is going to burn. So let's leave it 350. And the Alpine is going to be louder. Now, if we have a look at the different drivers, Hertz, lower, even lower than the Dayton. So it will have less output because it has less X-Max, obviously. JL, the old beloved JL, is even less than that. So if we're comparing this Alpine with the JL, we have a difference of 1, 2, 3, close to 4 dB in this critical range for a front subwoofer. SB Acoustics, it's really bad just because it is a bit more sensitive, but it has very little X-Max compared. I think it has like 7 or 8 millimeters of X-Max. I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, but it's lacking in output. The one that kind of stands out is the stereo integrity. Stereo integrity is very close to this Alpine. Alpine still has a little bit edge at the lower frequencies. The stereo integrity has an edge at higher frequencies, but it's very close. It's like 1.5 dB difference, just because it's a much bigger cone and the displacement of the cone is not as much as Alpine, but similar. And for fun, I just added these Fatal Pros, a few of these drivers. And with these, we have a situation like this, that they, if we have a look at transfer function, you can see they roll off very, very early. But what they lack in this bottom end, they compensate with sensitivity, because these drivers are very sensitive. They're like 90, 91, 92 dB sensitive, and they have not that much X-Max, but if we're looking at the SPL, you can see that at the higher frequencies, like 100 hertz and above, they just crush any other driver. They have so much level there. But if we would use it only for the front subwoofer, and we would cross it at like 70 or 80, all of this top end doesn't matter. And here, it's not that big of a difference. We can compare it with, like with the JL, it's very similar. It's a bit better than the SB Acoustics and less output than the Dayton. I might actually try just to buy one of these, just the cheapest one. I don't remember which one is it. I think this one, 10 RS-350, is like 70 pounds or something. I might try it because it has like 60 grams of moving mass, very, very light cone, and very small group delay for this driver. We'll go again here, and you can see it's all the way there. So from this, we see that the Alpine crushes all of them apart from the stereo integrity. But even if we compare these, the Alpine has a little bit more output. And again, the Alpine is limited thermally, not mechanically. If we could have a bigger enclosure, it would have much more output. So let's go back to this and let's see what the Alpine does in this small 0.35 cubic feet enclosure. Ta-da-ta-ta-ta! Bam. This is no crossovers, no EQ, nothing. And when I saw this, I was like, yes, I got it. So we can see that it matches the target from about 35 hertz. Here it kind of falls off. This is probably something to do with the cabin, that it doesn't boost much. It does peak at 57 hertz, and this peak will need to be tamed. It is 5 dB. We are losing energy, but it's fine. And this will be removed with a crossover, just like that. You can see, so the crossover is 100 hertz, Butterworth 30 dB per octave. And basically it removes all of this, and the only thing, you just need to remove this peak just to match it a little bit, and it's gonna be fine. This is in this small enclosure. If I would increase the enclosure size, if you remember from the modeling, this peak in bigger enclosure is at 52, at 0.35 is at close to 60. So it moves this peak about 7-8 hertz down. That means that here this peak would be about 50 hertz. So potentially I will have a little bit more energy here, so I can increase the target level maybe 2-3 dB extra, maybe something like this. In that case, I will need to cut it even less. It's gonna be perfect. So I think that this is gonna be a great success. Even if this response just by itself, it looks very peaky. It's peaking at 60 hertz and it looks like a one-note wonder, but in the grand scheme of things, when we take into account the targets, it is doing exactly, almost exactly what we need, which is very nice to see. Now, I did try to turn over the box. That means that put the cone firing at the firewall, and I got this, which is less energy, probably because there's not enough breathing space. Maybe, not sure. I'm not sure if I'm gonna bother with the down firing or like firewall firing, because it's a box that is much more difficult to construct and leave the space for the subwoofer to breathe. It's much easier just to aim it up properly, normally, and have the cone facing towards you. And another thing that I did, I measured the box in the center console, because I had the Dayton subwoofer in the center console in my Insignia. And if you remember, when I did that test, if anybody watched that video, the conclusion was the same, that in the footwell you have much more cabin gain and you have much more level. So these two measurements are on the same level on like the volume knob, but we have a difference of 10 decibels. So in the footwell, you're gaining 10 dB of extra energy, which is amazing for me to see. After I did this, I put the subwoofer in the very back, in the boot, in the same location where I showed you in the video, and the response is this. The level is different because it's a sweep, it's not RTA. So this is a sweep and this is the sweep. So this is the difference between the boot and the footwell. So we can see that in the boot, we have a bit more of the bottom end, whereas in the footwell, we had this peak at 60 because we don't have any gain below like 30 hertz or so. But in the boot, we have all that gain and that peak is not that noticeable. If we compare this with the Explode that we had previously, it's very similar, to be honest. The Explode has plus 10 dB at 20 hertz just because it has the port, but this Alpine has much more energy between 45 and 60, where you can see plus 10 dB here. If we add the Alpine HDC, we have this one. Let me remove the Explode. So the Alpine HDZ in that big ported box, we had a massive peak here at 25 and very little energy here. But this shallow in the back in the boot, it plays very nice. If we EQ it from 30 only, it's a very nice work, and I'm gonna show you how I did that EQ. So far, everything is good. Now let's have a look at the small little details. First of all, distortion. The thing that doesn't really matter for subwoofers, but it's interesting to have a look. So the level of this sweep, if I'm gonna go to SPL, I'm gonna tell you the difference between tight and loose. But the level of this sweep, you can see here, it's peaking at 102 decibels. It's pushed. It's not pushed to the limits, but the driver is pushed really loud, 100 decibels at 60 hertz. And the distortion we have, 0.2%. This is super low. All the other ones from 35 hertz all the way up to 150, we have 0.5% or less. And the distortion starts to increase below 35 hertz and reaches its max at 3.7% for sub-bass frequencies at 20 hertz, where the level, there's basically no level at 20 hertz. You can see here at 30, it just falls off. This is an amazing result. If we compare this with the Explode in the back, we can see that Explode, it was measured, however, on a lower level. So it's not really a fair comparison, but it has much less distortion here at the lower frequencies, but higher distortion, about 50-60 hertz. And the Alpine HDZ, Alpine HDZ has problems at higher frequencies above 45, we have 1%, 1.6%, but slightly lower distortion at the lower frequencies. But anyway, if we have a look only at this and we intend to play this driver between 40 and 100, we have a 0.5% at 100 dB level, which is amazing. Okay, another thing, impulse. This is going to be very fun because I want to show you something very interesting. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and I'm going to show you this one, loose. This is a measurement of a box in the footwell when I didn't hold it and it was resting on the carpet. And what we can see is we have loads of pre-ringing and loads of ringing afterwards. This is the actual zero time. When I put my feet on that box, that means I'm securing it, I'm fixing it to the floor, we have this, where we have absolutely no pre-ringing, and after that the impulse just literally stops. So this is the impulse of this driver in the footwell when it's fixed properly. Public service announcement, always mount your boxes, especially if you have like mid-bass boxes under the seats or in the kicks, maybe enclosures or whatever you're doing, front subwoofers, always mount them with the hardware into the actual body of the car, because otherwise you will have much longer impulse. Basically that means that the box is vibrating, and instead of you having only acoustical energy produced by the driver, you have some of that energy transferred into the box and making it vibrate. So yeah, mount your boxes. This is the impulse, which looks very good. We have from 0 to 70 milliseconds, and after that basically nothing. If we have a look at the Alpine HDZ in the boot, if you remember last time we had this, and you can see the big massive difference. This is just, it's like a totally different driver. Well, it is a totally different driver. The Explode, if you remember, it had better impulse compared to the HDZ, and this Alpine in the footwell has a much better impulse compared to the Explode, obviously. So what does this translate to? I think I can tell you straight away that this driver sounds bloody awesome. I did put it at the moment in the back because I cannot tune it without the rear subwoofer, because from the footwell it doesn't play much below 60, so it's kind of pointless to have it at the moment as a front sub. That's why this is the final EQ. I'm just going to show you very quickly. This was the Alpine raw response in the boot where that ported box was. This is after applied crossover, just to chop off the top end, and then a few bands of EQ. There's very little to reduce this, and we have a functional response from about 33. So it does play a 10-inch driver in 0.3 cubic foot, plays down to 33 hertz. This is, I don't know, to me it's ridiculous, because typically this would be very difficult to achieve. And anyway, I did this. This is with the whole system playing, and this was, if I can find that, yeah, that's the one. This was with the Alpine status driver in the ported box. So we can say that the response is identical, and the difference is massive. There's no overhang, there's nothing coming from the back, everything is on the dash, everything kicks as it should. It's a totally different system. Now, I could live with this shallow mount subwoofer in the back, but I am missing level. Just because this driver is very insensitive and it needs a lot of power. Currently, I have it on the 5-channel that does 500 watts rated, but at like 12 volts, probably is gonna do like 400. So it's missing power. It could do more, and I am missing volume. I had to reduce the whole front end by like 4 or 5 dB just to match this target, because again, it's very insensitive and it needs a lot of power. But yes, to me it's not 100%, but it's a very high correlation between the impulse that I can measure with REW and what I'm hearing, because the difference between this and this is massive, and it's clearly audible. Another thing, very quickly, we can have a look at the group delay. So if you remember, we had the Alpine HDZ, which was this one, and this is the Alpine shallow mount. The biggest difference that we see is, again, at the lowest frequency. So the group delay, at least to me, it doesn't really translate into, like, I don't know, It's hard to say because this Alpine, it doesn't play much below 30 hertz. And you can see that the group delay is rising for this, the shallow mount. I'm talking about the shallow mount. The group delay is rising and it peaks at 25 hertz. But at 25 hertz, which is here, you can see it doesn't play much. It's like it doesn't match the target and it's lower in level. So it's very hard to judge. I will have to listen to some songs with extremely low bass. The level is not going to be there, but I'm not sure if I will be able to notice if the bass below 30 is lagging just because there is no level. So it's very difficult to say. But in general, in higher frequencies, the group delay is the same like the Alpine HDZ and kind of the same as the Explode. And as I said as well, that even the HDZ Alpine, which had a dissociation of bass at the lower frequencies, at higher frequencies where it's matching with the front mid bass, like 40, 50, 60, 70, all of this here, it kicks together with the mid bass. The very bottom end that was different. So I don't know, it's difficult to say. To be honest, I don't really understand this group delay graph, but if we have a look at the impulse is very clear. I jumped out of the laptop, so I am sitting in the car. I'm recording in the car because it's the only quiet environment, because inside my little one is a walking chaos and the battery is dying on the laptop as well. So anyway, I'm gonna finish up here by saying that this subwoofer, at least in the back, it sounds really amazing. The only downside to it is the output that is kind of missing. I am used to having a bit more power, more level, and to be honest, a 10-inch with 20 millimeters of X-Max, so to be honest 15, because it's in a small box, it cannot reach the X-Max. It's not enough for my taste. I would need much more output out of a subwoofer in the back. However, when we're gonna put it in the front subwoofer in the footwell, and it's going to be covering just this range, I think personally that I will have more output than I actually need, which is great, because if I want my front end to catch up with 218s in the back, what I'm planning to do, I will really need this. I will need to rethink a little bit the front end situation with the mid bass. Now I'm thinking to put one audio in either infinite baffle or enclosures in the doors, because I will need them to play only above like 80, 85 over there. So even in the doors, they're not gonna rattle the doors, because crossed at 80, they're not gonna have that much energy. But let's summarize this quickly, because I have the little one waiting for me to read her a book. This driver is bloody amazing. Yes, it is expensive. Even in this tiny shallow little box, 10-liter box, it does what I wanted to do, just not enough output. So now I'm confident that I can make a proper enclosure in the footwell and run this driver with absolutely no issues. The only thing that I want to do, and it's gonna be probably next week or whatever, I'm gonna test exactly the same things, which is in the footwell, but with 3 different drivers. So I'll be putting the Dayton RS-W10D2, the one that I was running before as a front subwoofer. I will be putting one audio 8-inch mid-bass drivers, and I'm gonna put the Helix C5 8-inch drivers. And I'm gonna be doing this next time because I need to cut different baffles where I can mount the smaller drivers and that baffle on top of this, because I don't have anything cut now. Like, to do the measurements, to measure, it's very easy, but the prep is the thing that takes time. And now it's, again, school holidays, I'm sitting with the little one, I literally cannot do anything, so that's why I'm doing this at night. So Frank, again, thank you very much. I'm really grateful for this driver because it's gonna do more than I need to do. And as I mentioned, I will be maxing out this driver thermally rather than mechanically, so I can put probably a kilowatt monoblock on it just to have headroom in the amplifier. And if it's gonna blow, I hope not, I will have to try to tone it down a little bit, but we'll see how it's gonna be level level relative with the front end and with the infinite baffle. And again, for those that didn't watch my previous video, this is gonna be 18 in infinite baffle, and hopefully when I'm gonna save some money, there's gonna be a second one in there. That's why I need this. For normal people, for normal systems, this would be overkill and you really do not need it. If you have like an American truck and you want to put it under the seats where you don't have any space, this you can see is like 4 inches the depth. Bear in mind that you need at least 1.2 cubic feet for this driver. So if you're gonna have 2 drivers under the seats, you need 2.5 cubes of volume. If you're gonna suffocate it, it's not gonna perform optimally, and most likely you're gonna burn the coil before you're gonna bottom it out. This now is gonna go into my house, into my room, and it's gonna be acting as a home theater subwoofer, going down to 20 hertz and playing not as loud on like 200-300 watts. And this is gonna be here. The only thing I just need to fix it. I have these mounting points. I need to somehow fix it with brackets before I'm gonna go to work next week. But that's it. Long video. Really appreciate you watching. I hope you learned something, because this taught me a lot. Every time I do something, I learn new things. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.